following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.
Honorable Mr. Matab, leader of the delegation of India and chair host of the 7th edition of BRICS Parliamentary Forum, honorable presiding officers of Brazil, China, and Russia, honorable members and distinguished guests. It is an honor and a privilege for me to be part of this prestigious 7th edition of our Parliamentary Forum, BRICS. It is the first official BRICS Parliamentary Forum meeting for me as the Speaker of Parliament of the Republic of South Africa. In this regard, I wish to thank Your Excellency, Mr. Matab, for inviting me to be part of this auspicious meeting of parliaments which share common vision and common destiny. Your Excellencies, we're here today to discuss such a relevant and important theme of this meeting, the role of BRICS Parliament in ensuring equitable and inclusive post-pandemic economic recovery. This theme is not only relevant because of the current unprecedented challenges of the scourge of COVID-19, but it is relevant because it speaks to our foundation, the aims and the objectives of BRICS. Our heads of state were visionary and had a foresight about the challenges we are currently facing when they brought us together through the creation of BRICS. Your Excellencies, the current challenges, oh my gosh, you couldn't record throughout? Oh, sorry, I'm really sorry. Your Excellencies, the current challenges of economic stagnation and the rise of poverty and unemployment calls upon all of us as BRICS Parliamentary Forum to unite more than ever before and to strengthen our resolve to find solutions and to achieve what we sought to achieve when we created this important global role player called BRICS. We must continue to share common practices that will help to build our economies and to fight and defeat common challenges such as hunger, unemployment, and joblessness post-pandemic. This responsibility might look like a tall order considering the outbreak of various variants in a short period of time. For instance, yesterday we woke up with the shocking news about the alleged outbreak of another variant in various parts of the world, including our country, South Africa. Once again, of course, the world now is in a state of panic and uncertainty. I am sure all of us here are in a state of panic as we learned in the news about the cancellation of flights, and you wonder what impact that will have to trade between members of states, amongst members of states. We are told that certain countries will seal their borders against citizens of certain red tape countries. And of course, we find ourselves in a situation where we are deeply affected by this as a country, but also as a region. This comes at a time when our economy is recovering, is showing at least some promising signs of recovery following the losses we suffered during the previous 3 waves. Notwithstanding the avalanche of the current brutal challenges, parliaments remain the beacon of hope for the toiling masses of our people who are at the receiving end of these challenges. People look upon us to come with solutions aimed at reducing their hardships and to make their lives easier. Therefore, we must continue to work together to find solutions to the current challenges, and we must continue to give hope to those that have lost hope and to assure them that tomorrow will be a better day. Your Excellencies, I think increasing trade amongst ourselves and to revive tourism and hospitality industry could play a significant role in our effort for equitable and inclusive post-pandemic economic recovery. Your Excellencies, I also believe that our focus on skills exchange and opening of business opportunities, the creation of business-friendly environment, and the diversification of business opportunities in our member states could contribute into this noble cause. Of significant importance, Your Excellencies, is that in all our efforts to rejuvenate our economies post-pandemic, we must not leave behind women, youth, girl children, disabled, and the most vulnerable members of our societies. Your Excellencies, it will be remiss of me to conclude my input without commending the sterling efforts and initiative taken by South Africa and India at both the World Trade Organization and the United Nations level for proposing initiatives aimed at temporarily waiving of specific trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights relating to the manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccines, medicines, diagnostics, and other technologies. This initiative, co-sponsored by more than 60 countries, cautioned against the idea of vaccine nationalism, a matter which we will raise tomorrow in our statement. Part of the reasons eloquently stated by the two countries was that wavering parts of the agreement on trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights would allow drug makers in developing and poor countries to produce effective vaccines without worrying about these rules being used for self-centered gains. In conclusion, I believe that the conclusion of the BRICS protocol is long overdue, and we have no excuse to further delay the finalization of this important task. In this regard, I wish to convey our appreciation to our sister country, India, for reviving this important initiative. I certainly hope that all of us now will find time to prioritize and focus our energies in the finalization of the BRICS protocol. At the very least, Your Excellencies, we should agree on the timelines within which we should finalize the protocol. I should say, express our sincere gratitude to the support we received from Russia this afternoon for supporting the amendment which was being introduced by the African countries. It could have been difficult because there were several of them, there were about 5, and we had to pick on one. But that you could actually take the floor and withdraw and support the African continent is a very important matter to us. The reality is that, and I think I should say this, this COVID is entrenching stereotypes which you cannot imagine. Fact is, South Africa, scientists in South Africa are the ones who picked up a few days ago that there is this variant. And by coming out and talk about the variant and what it is that we need to do, it seems to us now we are being punished for disclosing to the world that there's a particular variant which was picked up. The unfortunate thing, and I must say this as a region, basically, we've always believed that within the African continent, if there's any region which is very strong and well organized, and if it decides to speak with one voice on a matter, it has great influence. It is SADC. Our belief is that the closure and the blocking of the countries around South Africa, which if you look at your map, you'll see that the whole of SADC is now red because a variant has been picked up in South Africa. What that basically means is that in the near future, in other fora, in other meetings which we may hold, of course, it means that the African continent will be weakened because the SADC region will not be participating, of course, except for virtual platforms. I just thought I should say this because it is actually irritating, it is annoying, because we are the ones who have come out and said, there's this, and now we find ourselves in a situation of isolation. Your Excellencies, honorable presiding officers of our parliaments, honorable members of parliament, and distinguished guests, I thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this meeting. Of course, I should say this, by making reference to all the issues that we are referring to, such as your vaccines and so on, we've not, I'm deliberately staying out away from the issue of Sputnik, because it has become clear to us and to all of us that it is not just certain countries. There's an agenda of isolating Sputnik as a vaccine, because we'll hear every now and then that there's more information which is required from the Russians, which they must provide in order for the World Health Organization to finalize this matter. So some of the countries are not getting the Sputnik because really you're not getting a clear voice and clear guidance from the World Health Organization as to exactly what the position is on Sputnik. And the tendency is therefore for some countries to say we will be guided by the World Health Organization. My view and our view is this protocol is very urgent because it will allow us and give us an opportunity to ensure that there is accountability to the BRICS Parliamentary Forum. Our heads of state meet on a regular basis. They discuss, they take decisions, and of course, who makes them account for those decisions? There is no forum where they could come, brief us about decisions they take, and ensure that there's accountability. Our view is that the sooner we sign this protocol, the better for all of us, because it will ensure that the role of oversight of Parliament is entrenched, so that there is some form of accountability by the executive. I thank you.
Honorable presiding officers, Your Excellencies, from our co-parliaments in the BRICS Parliamentary Forum, honorable members, distinguished guests. My name is Sylvia Lucas, and I am the Deputy Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces in South Africa, the upper house of Parliament. Honorable members, let me state this as follows. Women remain in the forefront, providing care and support during this pandemic. In spite of that, African women continue to be negatively impacted upon by abject poverty, inequality, unemployment, and economic exclusion. When considering the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the global economy, women continue to be disproportionately affected by entrenched level of economic exclusion, which reinforce old patterns of ownership and participation. The gendered and economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic must therefore be emphasized because women's quality of life has depreciated as this pandemic threatens to reverse some of the important advances and gains that we have made as women. It is important to indicate that while women in South Africa continue to face the multifaceted impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, they are also contending with the gender-based violence and femicide pandemic. Gender-based violence and femicide is a second pandemic. We have observed disproportionate levels of women being abused and killed by intimate partners, particularly during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. The South African Parliament has therefore made every effort to engage women at the inception of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 about the all-encompassing and multifaceted interventions that must be employed to ensure women's substantive and equal participation across all sectors of society. We have embarked on the process of reviewing the Women's Charter of South Africa, where Parliament of South Africa has engaged women across all provinces and districts, giving women an opportunity to postulate key development issues for priority intervention. Through the Women's Charter review process, we have found, and I quote from our document, that the growing body of evidence shows that economic growth is a gendered process and that gender inequalities can pose barriers to the shared prosperity of our democratic societies. We have also found that growth patterns that exploit women's position as a source of flexible labor may result in jobs that do very little to transform the bargaining power of women within the economy or lessen the burden of their unpaid care work. Furthermore, growth that generates forms of employment that favor male workers can also reinforce existing ideologies of the male breadwinner, leaving pre-existing gender inequalities largely intact. Such evidence makes it clear that unless the gender dimensions of inclusive growth are made explicit, and unless policies for inclusive growth aim to improve women's well-being and address gender gaps, it is unlikely that growth will benefit women and men equally. While we must acknowledge the devastating economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on our economies, we must also recognize this unprecedented period in global history as an opportunity or as an opportune time to aggressively pursue all strategic interventions to create an inclusive economy where women can benefit equally. One of the key challenges in bringing about development and economic transformation in South Africa or in the world is the fact that the structure of the economy has not changed and continues to reflect distorted patterns of ownership and exclusion, which in our case has very specific race and gender dimensions. South Africa remains an unequal society, and this is reflected in gross disparities in income and wealth. Women participate in large numbers in sectors of the economy which are characterized by low wages and poor working conditions. The gender pay gap persists, confining women to low remuneration, and is worsened by discrimination against women in the receipt of social benefits. Inclusive economic growth demands that efforts to advance a country's growth and development should be produced with the contribution of all citizens. The country's economic policies, legislative instruments, and strategic economic programs must be underpinned by equity as a principle. Furthermore, given the disproportionate impact of poverty, unemployment, and economic exclusion on women, it is imperative that entry barriers be identified and accordingly eradicated. It is then pertinent to focus on the gender factors that trigger an increase in and stimulate economic growth in both low and high income countries and result in inclusive economic growth. Democratic societies must acknowledge and accede that women are more than capable of making a meaningful contribution to economic productivity and the economic prospects of our democratic societies. So therefore, Women's economic empowerment must be clearly articulated in public policy documents, including particularly policy documents such as South Africa's Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan and our joint BRICS agreements, protocols, and collaborative interventions. The President of South Africa and the governing executive have demonstrated a firm commitment to ensure that the state machinery effectively engenders all planning and implementation processes of the state in order to ensure that women's economic empowerment and integration are accordingly prioritized. We are currently focusing on a process to ensure that all the economic recovery sector master plans contains clearly articulated gender-biased economic inclusion priorities. I wish to highlight some of the key issues that we are advocating for as contained in the newly adopted 2021 Women's Charter for Accelerated Development, which include the following. We emphasize that the structure of growth matters, which is often located in big companies, leaving intact old patterns of economic participation and ownership. We also emphasize that most poverty alleviation will emanate from SMMEs and micro businesses. A focus on women-owned SMMEs is therefore imperative for the advancement of inclusivity in the structure of growth. It is also imperative to increase the number of women who manage, own, and control enterprises and productive assets through interventions by the said departments like DTIC and the Department of Small Businesses, and through joint interventions and partnerships. We need to accelerate access to finances for women startup businesses. To this end, policy mechanisms must be developed to ensure the effective financial inclusion of women, as well as access to working capital for small, medium, and micro enterprises owned by women. Quarterly gender audits should be undertaken in order to follow expenditure patterns, disbursement patterns, and processes to finance emerging and developing women-owned enterprise. I think I can just elaborate a little bit when we speak about the disbursement patterns and processes. In many instances, you will find a policy that say, in any government business, at least 30% or a certain percentage must be given to women, but there is no commitment to make sure that it really happens. And that is why we are insisting that this kind of patterns need to be undertaken. It is also imperative that we will have to engage the financial sector in order to strengthen efforts to make financial services accessible and affordable to our women. It is hence our sincere wish that the BRICS joint economic recovery efforts will also place women at the top of the agenda. In increasing trade amongst ourselves, we must therefore ensure that women-owned enterprises enjoy priority access as part of our overall commitment to accelerate gender and economic equality. These are some of the strategic priorities that we want to continue to pursue in order to ensure that our post-COVID economic recovery processes place women at the top of the agenda, to ensure that women have got access universally to health services for their own well-being, including reproductive health, because it is clear that unless all of us begin to take the issue of gender equality serious, women will never be able to be empowered to the maximum. I thank you.
2021, in Carbis Bay in the United Kingdom, the G7 adopted a program which appears to be a direct response or an opposition to BRICS. They call it the Build Back Better World, which is about infrastructure, it's about an alternate agenda. And you can see from the articulations, particularly of the US president, that it's about responding to BRICS 1, but 2, responding to China's Belt and Road Initiative. And as part of that, I think that all the BRICS partners should be aware of the fact that that B3W program that is led by the G7 is going to try to polarize BRICS countries and try to drive them towards different agendas. They want to build a Cold Warish kind of polarization of the BRICS power bloc, simply because the BRICS countries account for 40% of the global population and 26% of the world's GDP, which might grow to even bigger numbers because of the potential of the partners that are involved there, but also for a significant component of world trade. So I would think that what needs to be emphasized from a legislative point of view and even from a summit point of view of BRICS is to solidify the unity of all BRICS countries, because the G7's effort will deliberately seek to polarize this union, which is the biggest potential to could change the balance of forces in the entire world in terms of what could happen. That is why the oversight role of parliaments could be much more significant, and perhaps a different approach to how the parliamentary forum should be constituted and oversee the work of the summit. It could rather meet on the sidelines of the BRICS summit itself instead of meeting on the sidelines of IPU only. In the IPU can just be updates, but in the summit itself, where the heads of state and government are present, then there can be a much more meaningful contribution and interaction from an oversight point of view. Those are some of the issues that we had to raise, that we have to be aware that there is an emergence of a Build Back Better World, which is a response to BRICS and to China's BRI, which we have to be careful of, because the first target will be the countries within BRICS, which will be polarized, particularly by the US, for whatever particular purpose. So that is one issue that all BRICS countries must be aware of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Member.
Following up on our commitments to the people, making your future work better.